So as most of you would know, at the end of last year, I went ahead and bought a whole bunch of proper fake fountain pens that are made in China by some random company that bear all the logos of proper brand name pens. And the first pen that I looked at the end of last year was this pen. This is a $6 Parker Sonnet that I bought off Aliexpress, and for $6 I was pretty impressed because the proper Parker Sonnet costs around about $200, and they'd done a very good job at recreating that pen and making it look like a $200 pen. However, there were actually a lot of other fakes that I was able to find on AliExpress, and one of them was this. This is the Parker Vector, one of the more affordable fountain pens in Parker's lineup. And when I say more affordable, it's probably the cheapest fountain pen Parker make. I actually have used a Parker Vector for the past 2 years. This one here in plastic, blue plastic, and this one here was about $14. So they're pretty affordable Parker fountain pens, and they've been making them for quite a long time. However, this one that I found on AliExpress wasn't even close to that. This one here was something like $1, or even less than that. It was absolutely nothing. It's probably one of the cheapest fountain pens I've seen on AliExpress. So I thought, why not go ahead and buy this pen, see what it's like. And I gotta say, I wasn't expecting much. I really wasn't. Usually I do expect a lot from Chinese fountain pens, but here's the thing. Usually when I buy a clone of a pen, I'm expecting them to try and emulate, to a degree, the more expensive fountain pen by making it look nice and fitting a decent-ish nib. The standard Parker Vector doesn't look all that great. It's a pretty bland pen, and as well as that, the nib is, well, it's not terrible, it's pretty reliable, but it's just boring. So as a result, my expectations weren't all that high, but upon getting it, I was actually pretty impressed. Looking at both of them side by side, they're actually pretty similar. You actually don't have to squint to realize that this is a properly good clone. In fact, all the dimensions add up pretty well. Capped, this fountain pen is about 13.1 centimeters long, uncapped is 11.5 centimeters long, and posted it's 15.5 centimeters long. So the dimensions are there. And in terms of the weight, I'm not exactly sure how much the proper Parker Vector metal weighs, but this one here is what I would expect, about 13 grams capped and 8 grams uncapped. So it's pretty much what I would expect. And as well as that, the ergonomics and the design are pretty much in line with what I remember from my Parker Vector, because it looks the same, and when you use it, the ergonomics are pretty much the same. And for those of you who have seen my Parker Vector review, you'd know my feelings on the Parker Vector. It's a pretty bland pen to use, and one of my biggest gripes with this pen is the fact that it's a pretty slim pen. I think it's like 8 or 9 millimeters in diameter for the grip. And as well as that, there's this ugly and pretty annoying step down that's actually pretty sharp that I'm no huge fan of. In fact, I was so much of a hater of that step down that I went ahead and filed down the step down on my plastic pen, which made it 100 times more comfortable to use. But in terms of the feel, it's pretty much Parker Vector-ish. So that's pretty much what you would expect from a fake pen. And I gotta say, in terms of copying everything, they've done a pretty good job. Everything looks the same. The clip design is pretty simple, so they've copied it pretty well. And in fact, there's a lot of fountain pens in China that use this Parker clip, so that's a pretty simple thing to do. But in terms of build quality as well, this pen is pretty solid. Like the standard Parker Vector is, when you pick it up, you can tell that this is not a thing of quality. It's, everything sort of wobbles a bit. It's not the highest quality fountain pen. And you can usually tell when you pick these pens up. But when you pick this one up, it feels, like it's alright built. It feels like a proper Parker Vector. When you post the pen, it posts securely. So I gotta say, in terms of build quality, this thing is alright. It sort of passes. And in terms of the metal, this pen is... well, it's metal. What do you expect? It's stainless steel, it resists scratching, and it doesn't, I guess, deform or break when you put it under pressure. It's what you would expect. And in terms of the ink filling mechanism, it comes with a fake converter, so it is pretty much what you expect. It's a fake, and it looks the part. But let's get to the nib, because this is the part where it all falls apart. Because I've always said if a fountain pen looks nice but its nib is not very good, the pen is really pretty much useless, and for me anyways, I'm not going to use the nib. And this pen here is just a classic example of a pen that is totally let down by the nib. Because I said when I reviewed the proper Parker Vector, while the pen was bland to look at, and while it wasn't the most comfortable pen to use, the nib was alright. It was reliable, it was very nicely ground, it was buttery smooth, but it was pretty boring to use, which meant I could use it as an everyday carry pen. It would work whenever I needed it to, it wouldn't bleed through, but I certainly wouldn't use it as a pen that I wanted to write with for fun. And that is a little bit of an issue, because that is the best that you would expect from Parker. So when someone tries to go ahead and make a clone, which is obviously not going to be as good, you really can't expect much from the nib. And honestly, this has been a pretty shocking nib to use. This nib is just not very good. The design is pretty much there, it looks the part, but in using it, I've had nothing but trouble. First of all, there's almost no tipping on this fountain pen. When you look at the proper Parker Vector, you will notice that there is a big chunk of tipping. On this one, there is hardly any tipping at all, and the grinding and polishing of this nib is pretty poor. It feels like an italic nib, though it is very, very unpleasant to use. It's scratchy, it digs into the paper. You'll see in the writing sample, but it is not a great nib to use, and as well as that, it is very unreliable. It skips all the time, it hard starts, it's not a great nib to use as an everyday carry nib, and as well as that, this nib leaks very, very badly. Honestly, I will leave this pen just in my pocket, and when I come to pull it out, almost every time, there will always be a little bit of ink always on the grip of this pen, which is pretty much unacceptable. So this nib, honestly, is just a dud. I'm not going to use it in the future, it's just not great, and because it's only 80 cents, I don't think it's worth polishing and grinding and fixing it up. It's just not that great of a nib. Alright, welcome to the writing sample for the fake Parker Vector. The ink that I'm using is, I think this is Noodler's Black, and I'm not exactly sure what sort of nib size this is. I'm just going to say it's a fine/medium. It was unlisted. And the paper that I'm using is a Lectrum 1917 book that I was sent for Christmas by my friend Bill. This stuff is genuinely awesome paper. So let's get into a very quick writing sample, and even now you can see a little bit of ink leaking from the cap onto my fingers. One of the many times that this has happened, and it really is annoying. So let's get a quick writing sample. And as you can see from that writing sample, the pen, when I do get it to start up, writes, it does write well, though this is really nice paper. When I write it on some bad paper, such as this cheaper copy paper, I don't know if you can hear that on the microphone, though it is incredibly scratchy, so writing on cheaper paper is a pretty unpleasant experience, but writing it here, I don't think I had any issues. I just refilled the pen, so that might be why it doesn't skip, but here, it writes alright. Though it is a pretty boring nib. There's no line variation at all in terms of flex in the nib. In terms of the natural line variation due to the grinding of the nib, you can see that downstrokes are generally pretty thick and the side strokes are pretty thin. And that's something that I like on pens, though this pen here is very, very scratchy, so in practice it is not that great. And in terms of actual line variation, there's the pen with no pressure and building up pressure, and that's as much as I would dare put in. So you pretty much get no line variation at all. Now, in terms of ink flow is also pretty inconsistent. When I've filled the pen, it's actually pretty wet. So I've just filled the pen and it's going to be pretty wet. Though as the converter empties out, the ink flow is going to vary, going from very wet to being skippy and dry. So it's really hard to judge the ink flow of this pen. And in terms of reverse writing, very, very scratchy. It's even digging up this paper, though you can certainly do it. So from this writing sample, on the best paper, yes, this pen can certainly write, but honestly, when using paper as good as this, go ahead and get a nicer pen. This pen here, while it can write, it's not very enjoyable. It's very boring. It has a very stiff nib, and honestly, there's just much nicer pens that you could get for not that much more money. And that's the writing sample for the Parker Vector. Alright, conclusion time. And I've got to say, I have not had a great experience with this Parker Vector fake. Honestly, I don't think I could really recommend it to anyone, even though it did cost something like 80 cents or $1. It really isn't a great pen at all. Honestly, the pen that you start off with is not a pen I would really recommend to anyone, and then you go ahead and make a copy of it, which is just a little bit worse in every way. Plus, you add in a pretty poor nib, and I think it is a pretty hard sell. Like, yes, you could buy this pen and it wouldn't cost you anything, but the issue is when you do get this pen, you might write with it for maybe 20 minutes, and after that, it is a little bit of a struggle. I think there are a lot of other pens in the same, bracket, which cost very similar amounts of money, that perform so much better, such as the Wing Sung pens, and I think those pens are just much better buys, and pens you would actually enjoy using for long periods of time. So, my recommendation is don't buy this, there are much better pens to buy. And as always, thank you very much for watching.